with the conclusion is Dr. Barbara Smith, director of the Comprehensive Breast Health Center at Massachusetts General Hospital. She joins us this morning from Boston. Dr. Smith, good morning.
Good morning.
Women have been hearing conflicting recommendations for several years now. What advice would you give women in their 40s?
As I see the evidence that exists today, it favors having mammograms between 40 and 49. The update that was recently gotten from Swedish studies really does show a survival benefit for women who have screening in this age group.
How big a survival benefit are we talking about?
Well, the Swedish studies showed 35 and 44% survival improvement. If you combine this with some older studies, the overall benefit's probably somewhere between 17 and 24%.
Now, those who recommend against having mammograms earlier than age 50 point out that there are downsides to having mammograms, including the risk of being exposed to radiation. How serious a risk is that in your estimation?
That's right. I think it's quite small. The risk of radiation causing damage to breast tissue in a woman in her 40s is quite low.
It's also the problem, Dr. Smith, of false positives, that mammograms show lumps that may not turn out to be cancerous, but women undergo biopsies and in some cases even surgery, despite the fact that they are benign tumors.
Right. Our tests aren't perfect yet and aren't perfect at telling the difference between benign and malignant. We often have to get a piece of tissue to be sure. What's happening now, though, is more and more women can have their biopsies with a needle. It's much less painful, it costs less, it doesn't leave much of a scar, if any scar. And I think that's the way to look at things. Do the least invasive biopsy, but still get the information.
If you feel so strongly about women in their 40s getting mammograms, why do you think so many other respected medical experts have disagreed with you? What do you think the motivation is?
Well, there's a lot of issues that are at stake here, and I think a lot of the people who disagree are good intention but read the data differently. I think also there are considerations of cost. It's very expensive to do mammograms in every woman in her 40s, and that's an issue we're all having to struggle with. When can we afford tests and when can't we?
So you think it's an insurance issue in some ways?
Well, I think cost is a big part of what the arguments are, yes.
Bottom line, I'm 40 years old with no history of breast cancer in my family. If you were my doctor, what would you tell me to do?
I would tell you the same thing that I do myself, which is have mammograms every year.
Every year, not every 2 years, every year.
Every year is what some of the studies are supporting. I wouldn't argue with every other year, but I think what I do myself, and I'm a 40-something, is every year.
Now a hearing on breast cancer research, prevention, and treatment. A Senate Appropriations Subcommittee yesterday heard testimony from officials with the National Cancer Institute, the American Cancer Society, and other groups on legislation to improve access to breast cancer screenings and other issues. Pennsylvania Senator Arlen Specter chaired the hour-and-a-half hearing.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Precisely 9:30, and this 9:30 hearing of the Subcommittee on Labor, Health, Human Services, and Education will commence. We have one of our most important hearings of the year today, and that is the hearing on breast cancer. Well, just put it, there is no more important issue on medical research than breast cancer, and it has competitors with ovarian cancer and prostate cancer and lymphoma and heart ailments and many other maladies, but it has claimed the lives of 1 woman out of 9. There have been an enormous increase in funding. I'll put those statistics into the record, not to take too much time now. Lead witness is Dr. Richard Klausner, appointed director of the National Cancer Institute in August of 1995. He's been here on many, many occasions. He's accompanied by Dr. James Marks, the director of the National Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion of the Centers for Disease Control, where he has held numerous positions over the past 25 years. And
what we do right now is to actually demonstrate some of the fruits of this support for research, beginning by one measure, and that is just what is happening to mortality rates from breast cancer. Up until 1990, each year mortality rates were rising in this country. 1991 to 1995, historically, for the first time, we saw mortality rates dropping by about 1.6% per year, and that is now accelerating to about 3.5% per year. We expect it to continue. We expect it to accelerate. Even if it stopped at this level but continued over the next 10 years, that would mean a 30 to 40% drop in the mortality rate from breast cancer. We've achieved good dissemination of our best early detection tool, mammography, which you'll hear about, but mammography is far from perfect, and to really affect early detection, we need new, really new approaches. We've incrementally improved survival, but with relatively toxic and, with a few exceptions, not specific treatments. It's likely that we can continue to make these incremental improvements, and we must make sure that all women have access to prompt and state-of-the-art treatment. But if we're going to do better, and we can and must, we must switch our treatment approach so that we know the different types of breast cancer, to treat each as a distinct disease, and we must now develop new treatments based upon the molecular machinery of each type of breast cancer. So now we'll do a 4-minute molecular biology lesson in breast cancer. For 100 years, we've diagnosed breast cancer, as you see on the left, under the microscope, abnormal cells. That's pretty much what we knew. That's not what cancer is. Cancer is a disease of molecular alterations. For the first time now, at the beginning of the 21st century, we can switch from looking under the microscope alone to reading genes. And what you see there is a gene chip to read the true molecular profile and discern the true molecular nature of breast cancer. There's about 30,000 genes on that little penny-sized chip. And so what we've done is we've challenged the community with an $80 million program, actually called the Director's Challenge, to redefine breast cancer. And you see the result of that chip. One experiment, 50,000 data points. And what happens is that it turns out, as we suspected, breast cancer, while looking the same under the microscope, is at least, next slide, 6 different diseases. We could not know this before about 9 months ago. It's hard to read this. Take my word, it's 6 different diseases. The most important thing is all of these differences, when corrected for the exact same stage of disease, which today has been the best way of predicting outcome, now when you discern the true molecular differences between totally different diseases that we're all lumping as breast cancer, we see entirely different outcomes, from one type having a 0 3-year survival to another type having a 95% 3-year survival. Next slide. What will this mean? First of all, we need to switch to thinking about these as molecular diseases and as distinct diseases. As you've heard me talk about, we've gone in one generation from cancer being a black box to then, through research, drawing the circuitry of cancer. But with that circuitry, we don't stop. It is this circuitry that provides the new and truly revolutionary targets for therapy against these different diseases. And now you'll see what's happened. From that circuitry, on the next slide, we see all of the pieces of the circuitry that we know so far to be altered in different types of breast cancer. And already in green are the list of all of the drugs that are already entering clinical trials just in the last couple of years that are now directed against each of those points of the circuitry. I can't tell you how much this is a complete change from the sledgehammer approach to the black box of cancer that we've lived with for too long. Next slide. We can see how quickly we've moved from identifying the targets, here classifying them in a new way. 15 classes of molecular targets in breast cancer, 68 individual targets identified specifically, and now already 130 trials supported by the NCI and industry, now you see directed against all of these targets. It is these therapies that you've heard me talking about for several years. The difference is, 5 years ago, if I would have drawn this, it basically would have been blank. 130 trials, 68 different targets, about 85 agents. This is the immediate effect of all of this research you've supported. And we now know that each of these targets are not present in breast cancer per se, but in these different molecular forms, which for the first time with these brand new technologies that have been now developed and disseminated to the research community will allow us for the first time to think about the right treatment for the right disease. And I'll stop there and
Turn now to Dr. Marr.